Hello and welcome to our webinar titled Solving the Special Education Teacher Shortage, a Suitable Approach to Growing Your Own Educators. Our presenters today are Dr. Wendy Adams, Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Alton Community United Unit School District, Dr. Elizabeth Robinson, Superintendent of Schools, Pocono Mountain School District, and Dr. Mark Wade, Assistant Superintendent for Special Education, Pocono Mountain School District. This is also moderated by Jason Lang, President and Co-founder of Bloomboard. Today's webinar will include approximately 45 minutes of presentation, followed by 15 minutes of questions and answers. As questions arise during the webinar, please enter them into the chat. This webinar is being sponsored by Bloomboard and is provided at no charge for ASPA members and non-members. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for future review under the members section of aspa.org. With that, welcome Wendy, Mark, Elizabeth, and Jason. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much. Super excited about the conversation here. I know it's obviously an interesting time in education these days, and certainly in the special ed world. And so excited about the conversation about the work that y'all are doing, and really sort of how it's, changing people's lives in the process. So want to just sort of give a little background, sort of stage setting, just up front, sort of start in the process to talk a little bit about sort of the special ed shortage as it is today. And sort of how has that sort of been changing over the years, and just sort of give a little bit of the grounding of your districts would also be super helpful in the process. So Dr. Adams, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Special ed challenges, they continue like other positions, but special ed more severely over the last few years since I've been in this position, which was in 2018. The number of those vacancies continue to increase. I think the pandemic probably played a part in that, the stresses of it, and then just the people that are retiring a lot sooner because they realize that, time is a little bit more important to them at this stage in their life. And so the biggest part of our vacancies happen really with attrition or people leaving education.
Dr. Robinson, Dr. Wade, can you give a little bit about sort of what are you all seeing in the special ed side, and sort of how does that shape out in your district?
So Pocono Mountain School District, we're the largest, most diverse school district in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. And just over about 22 to 23% of our student population is that of exceptional needs. In 2011, when I actually became the superintendent of Pocono Mountain School District, in Pennsylvania at that time, there was about 2,700 teachers that were getting their special ed certification. And to date, we're down about 59% with only about 1,140 teachers being able to get their special ed certification. So that's drastically reduced the impact for us to be able to gain teachers with that certification across Pennsylvania, and especially within our school district.
And can you share a little bit just sort of the real world impact? I know obviously lots of folks in this sort of call are sort of folks in the special ed world. Can you just share some of what that feels like in terms of sort of teacher involvement and engagement? What do you both
Mark?
Yeah, I can touch on that. I think right now we're seeing a higher student need and more complex behaviors and significant learning and social emotional gaps all at the same time. And special ed educators are facing heavier caseloads, increased paperwork, of course, tied to compliance. And so that's kind of leading to it's leading to burnout and higher turnovers. And I think districts are struggling to recruit new staff. As basically Dr. Robinson said, fewer people are entering the field right now.
Yeah. Dr. Adams, anything different, similar?
Yeah, I would say to match that, but then filling those vacancies a lot of times because the kids are coming regardless. And so you have to have someone in those classrooms. So you're unfortunately getting a lot of unexperienced long-term subs in those classrooms. They cannot provide the paperwork or the services really that those students need and deserve. And so you're having to put additional paperwork on the certified staff, but the students are still not getting the services that they need. They're not necessarily getting the interventions that they need, which, it's not right and can be also some compliance issues.
Totally. And can you talk a little bit about, I know, this idea of, where do you go for that pipeline? Right? We know the pipeline, both at the teacher prep level is at historic lows and continue to get lower. I think we've seen several marquee institutions, right? I think LSU graduated 5 candidates, right? Which, certainly wasn't the case many years ago. I know University of Florida used to be at several thousand to a couple thousand candidates a year. And now this past year, 2 years ago, was the first year they ever dropped below 100. And so we are definitely down in sort of pretty concerning levels from a teacher prep role. And so I think obviously that's put a lot more strain on alt-cert pathways, on sort of other sort of creative ways. I think one of the areas that's really in the last year or two started to get a lot of, interest is this idea of growing your own pipeline from within. And so can you talk a little bit about sort of, your all sort of decision around sort of really investing in that sort of grow your own model, and what was sort of going on there in terms of as you're thinking about how that sort of sits in the broader scheme of sort of different pathways that you're working on?
Sure. I would say here in Alton, we had a lot of paraprofessionals that were able to sub for us, and they were filling in some of those long-term sub things, and they were doing a fantastic job. But they also had barriers of, not being able to financially stop working to go the traditional route to get their teacher certification. And so we, I guess would say one of the positives of the pandemic started with some ESSER funding that that was our first cohort that we decided we're going to invest in our own staff to try to build that pipeline to pay for them to go to school to get that endorsement so that they could be a certified teacher. And then we continued that through the teacher vacancy grant, using those funds to invest in our own staff.
And I would say for Pocono Mountain, about 3 years ago, actually, we started to talk about this within our district. We were looking at data across Pennsylvania. We were looking at Bloom Board's relationship with our capital IU-15. I'm looking to see how that program actually did very well within that area. And going to conferences, bringing that back, getting together with Dr. Wade, looking at this and saying, okay, how can we do this within Pocono Mountain School District? And that's when we really kind of got things in motion last year to really start our new cohort this year within our school district. And, when you look back, you say to yourself, we probably should have thought about this sooner. We were looking at the shortages. We were analyzing it. We kept looking how many teacher certs were happening across the state. But to really, sometimes it takes, some leadership, some assistance to try to kind of work within your own school district, because you have to commit that time to be able to grow your own program. So with Dr. Wade and some of his key people, we were able to kind of get it off the ground this year with our first cohort, which has been pretty exciting. And I'm sure Mark can share more about that.
Yeah, can you share a little bit sort of for both of you, Dr. Wade, can you share a little bit, what does that cohort look like? How's the program going so far? What does it really sort of look like in reality?
So right now we have 8 paras that started the program. We have currently about 82 paras in our district, but of course, some of our paras wanted to see how it was going to work out first. So we had 8 great volunteers who started the program. We got them set up with mentors, and I think it's been going well. They finished their first 4 classes the semester previously, and they started their second set of classes about a week ago. And, they had nothing but positive things to say about the program right now.
Dr. Adams, what's your sort of structure look like? How are y'all sort of going? You're a couple of years in.
Yeah, so this is actually our first year, our second cohort through Bloom Board. And I'm really loving the partnership. Prior to that, we had worked with some local universities and they met, some of our needs. The partnership with Bloom Board has been just a little bit more flexible for us. We had previously worked with Greenville University as well as Blackburn and McKendree.
And I know, obviously, I think part of what we find from the para audience and certainly from the sort of new high school grad audience is this idea of, right, how can I balance all of the time and work to go back to school, right? Ideally full-time, because we know if you're not going full-time, the amount of time it takes to get a bachelor's degree, right, is just too long, right? It's too far out to really see. And so I think what we find is, right, the more you're trying to balance that sort of full-time course load and full-time work schedule, that just gets pretty untenable pretty quick in the traditional, even in the online asynchronous world. And so a lot of the work that we've been obviously sort of focused on at the district is how do you sort of embed that degree into the workday, and how you sort of take those course requirements and take that sort of work with candidates. And so can you talk a little bit about sort of the feedback you've heard from candidates and sort of that experience of this sort of on the job approach, and sort of what that sort of has meant for sort of candidates and how they've sort of seen that play out?
Yes,
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
I just wanted to say that, normally we would have, like you said earlier, partnership with local community schools, not community schools, local colleges. And one of the biggest drawback for us was that they weren't able to utilize the program within our district to give credit to the paras while they're working. I think our paras would have to quit their job to do the full-time student learning. And I think the connection with Bloomboard allows our paras the opportunity to get that on site while they're working credit towards that graduation. So I think that is the major difference between Bloomboard and the local colleges.
Yeah. And I would say for us, the programs that we were working with, they didn't have to quit their day job, but that also didn't decrease the amount of out of school work that they had to do for coursework, which was problematic when you think about time and family and trying to balance all of those things. And on top of that, there was no credit really given for their on-the-job experience. And many of them have been paras in our district, for 10 years or more. And so we value that work, which is why we wanted to invest in them. And so Bloomboard was just an ideal partnership for that. The feedback that the weekly meetings, well, I should say bi-weekly meetings that I have with the team, the weekly emails that I receive, I'm able to really motivate and encourage the candidates that are in there and really keep tabs on them, where I didn't get any feedback from the other universities. So, I know how our money is being spent.
Well, I think, and there's a question here in terms of sort of the framework and the structure of the program and the process. And so I thought maybe it'd be super helpful. I can just sort of really quickly give an overview of that. So the way that the sort of programs in our world are structured is it's really about this idea of taking a sort of 3-credit degree in the traditional model, right? So my teacher prep, I'm guessing many of y'all's teacher prep came from a bunch of classrooms, right? And you're sort of learning about, sort of various sort of strategies, even at a wonderful school like Stanford, right? My old school PhDs would still provide these courses where we'd be going through, watching videos from 30 years earlier in black and white and watching, talking about how students were in their zones of proximal development. And that was just not going to actually help me really understand sort of what matters for a teacher in terms of what it looks like to be in a classroom. And so I think a lot of our work was really thinking about this idea of what if we could take the coursework on your job and really sort of use this apprenticeship-like model to sort of unpack that theory, unpack that coursework, where everything you're working on in our world really starts with that theory and that practice, but then we hand candidates blank artifacts to fill out, whether it's learner profiles, or whether it's one-on-one asset-based feedback templates, and we hand them real-life artifacts that they need to go complete in their classroom. And that as they submit those artifacts, as they implement that in their classroom, in their normal day-to-day job, right? That's what faculty and their mentors are really engaging in. And each one of those mini action research projects, mini cycles of inquiry, is then sort of resulting in a credit hour towards a degree, which we're obviously aggregating up into various degrees in special ed, in elementary ed, in some different certification pathways. So I thought does that answer everybody's question in terms of the sort of the overall sort of structure? And again, I do want to try to make this as much of a conversation as possible. And so certainly if you have questions, put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and sort of looking for a Q&A as we're going through it. I guess what would be helpful is just sort of, as you think about sort of that model, can you share a little bit of upfront what you all were thinking, right, as we were going into the partnership process in terms of what are the sort of things that you now sort of having implemented, right, sort of really had sort of clarity as you were going through the process? Like what have been the surprises in the process as you've been going through it?
I actually am very pleased with how the partnership has gone. because when you're kind of embarking on this relationship, I can't always make them, but Mark's always great about making sure he's on those weekly meetings. But really, it's been a very supportive partnership along the way. And I really like those connections, those meetings. We're able to track the progress that's shared with us, of our candidates, so that if we have to kind of reach out to someone, reach out to a mentor, provide a little bit more help for our paras going through this program, it offers us that opportunity. So you're really kind of giving that oversight. But I think more importantly for me as a superintendent, to hear some of the paras actually, like, they're talking about this in their buildings and they're engaging with other teachers. And when I think back of how real learning occurs, I could almost, you can almost say to yourself, why didn't I do this 10 years ago? Why did we just think of this now? Because of the shortage. But as far as the real learning that our paras are getting and working with their mentors, working with their teachers, I often feel bad because in my early years as a superintendent, and it was the way that the structure was, we had great paraprofessionals that had to quit their jobs to go back to become teachers. And fortunately, some came back to us and did become teachers, but in some cases they didn't. They went somewhere else. And now I feel like we are really able to kind of embark on that relationship, that growing your own. A lot of these people are deeply rooted within our community. So they're going to hopefully stay, within our school system, which is really a huge benefit for us as a school district.
Yeah. Dr. Adams, thoughts on sort of your thoughts on impact and sort of how you've seen that play out in terms of the para engagement?
Yeah, I love the partnership. And I would say one of the highlights for me that did not occur during the other partnerships that I had with other universities was that key part of them having a building mentor, and us compensating those mentors like we do our other ones. Having a mentor while they're going through the program, I think, is really essential and vital to their success. And some of the candidates that went through our other programs, they didn't have that. Some were resilient and absolutely, got through it, but some probably struggled a little more in isolation than they should have in hindsight.
Yeah, and I think, we touched a little bit on the mentor, and so I think it'd be helpful. Can you all share a little bit about sort of that mentor structures and sort of what that looks like, and sort of how do you feel like that's played out as a support capacity? We know it's obviously super important, but I think there's obviously sort of questions in here in terms of what that looks like.
I know in our district, most of our mentors have been their classroom teachers, because we've been fortunate. There's a couple of people, like, we had to kind of move their placement around just a little bit. We had some flexibility within the building, the role that they were serving, so that they had a little bit more one-on-one time with their mentor. So that part, that structure is pretty solid. The training that is provided to the mentors is great. And then they have access to all these kind of tools, and they're able to reach out to us if they need additional support. So all of those things that a Bloom board has provided has kind of helped my thought process, even just moving forward on how important that piece is to them being successful, as well as them feeling the support of the district while they're going through their program. So then I think they also know that we're going to be more intentional about supporting them once they graduate.
That is quite similar to what we do in the Poconos. I meet with the paras on a regular basis and the mentors, and we make sure we try to pair them with someone who's strong, who's going to give them that foundation. And usually at this point, we try to pair them with someone who they're working with in the classroom. And sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but we try to move them around so at least they're in the same building so that they can get that support that they need.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about sort of the day-to-day life of the para sort of in the process? I think that's always sort of a helpful, sort of question in terms of what does that look like in terms of time and sort of, time spent in their sort of normal work versus sort of time spent in the sort of the courses in the process. Do you have sort of any of that context you can share?
Well, most of our paras are working 7.5 to 8 hours a day. But we're trying to make sure, I know Dr. Wade and I met with all the principals where our we have our paras in the program, and we've tried to make sure that we have that flexibility if they have to get in to see a different type of a lesson. So we're trying to make those adjustments as we go along as well, so that they get those experiences that they need to fulfill the requirements of the classes they have, which has been working wonderfully. I mean, everybody, I think, is really very supportive of making those adjustments within the classroom. But then I know often some of our paras after school are kind of sitting together, and I know they have meetings on certain days during the week, like at 4 o'clock after the school day, where they're on with their advisors. And a lot of times they're kind of doing that together from their laptop. So they're having other conversations that I think are important and more meaningful to learning as well. It's not just isolated, like you're going home and just doing everything by yourself. They're having those meaningful conversations with each other. But I do think it's important for a district to make sure that you're providing those opportunities if we have to make a switch or make sure that they can see a certain type of a lesson or get a certain experience. I think that's important for the buy-in of being able to establish this relationship.
Yeah. And we generally find, I mean, if you think it's probably about an hour, if you think it's most of the coursework is obviously embedded in the job. And so candidates are working in the job on their sort of actual coursework. We find, from a homework standpoint, there may be an hour or two of homework that candidates are doing sort of on their own, right? Sort of filling out, annotating sort of videos that they're sort of submitting. And so that they're doing an hour or two of homework a week, but they're still enrolled full time, which is really the beauty, right? We have candidates who are doing 12, 15 credit hours of full-time coursework inside of the same semester while they're working full-time. And that historically just has not been possible in the process. And so we know that that's been a really important sort of aspect. Can you all talk a little bit about, there's a question in here around sort of how do paras apply for the program, eligibility criteria, right? And sort of the process to get paras through and your selection criteria for that. And then, retention, sort of structures in place. Can you just talk sort of logistically around sort of how you organize that sort of selection criteria and the process to have paras come through?
I would say in Alton, of course, we advertised the program, and then candidates attended the webinar to learn more about it. Then they completed an application, and I kind of go through all of those applications and consult with their building principals just to kind of see, are these going to be really good quality candidates to potentially fill teacher roles? How are they doing in their current positions? Then from that, offers were extended to individuals, but we also advertised outside of our current employees, that because we did get a couple candidates that they took a job with us because they wanted to go through the program. So they were hired on, and that is a requirement. You have to be an employee of the district, and then post-graduation, you're signing a contract that you'll work in the district for 5 years in a special education position.
And at Pocono Mountain, I know Dr. Wade and I talked about how to get this message out. And, in terms of everything always being online, we really held an in-person meeting. That's how we started the program with all of our paraprofessionals. We really wanted to walk through that. And at that time, we had arranged with Bloomberg to be part of that presentation to kind of go through what that pathway would look like. And then we actually, Dr. Wade had sent the survey out to all of our paras, really getting their interest to see where they stood and what degree they had. Some of our paraprofessionals, ironically, already had bachelor's degrees. So there were differences within our population after Mark had sent out the survey. So we tried to decide, okay, what's really best for the district and where's the need right now. And we knew it was really within the area of special education. So we kind of focused on that area for now. But now that word is out, there's more people now that Mark's interviewing, even for new paras, that are already asking about the program for the next cohort for next year, which is really exciting. But I really, as a superintendent, I like to be able to do those face-to-face meetings if I can, because I think there's a comfort level of being able to explain something. People grabbed us afterwards, maybe might not want to ask a question online, but would grab us afterwards. And I think that was a good way to really start introducing what the program was going to look like for Pocono Mountain.
Right, and we just sent out the second set of surveys for the spring semester, and we're starting to get a lot more, interest in it. So once I have a chance to sit down and look at the results, then I'll coordinate with our folks from Bloomboard and decide what we're gonna do moving forward for the summer cohort or the fall cohort.
Yeah, and I think it leads into a bunch of questions that have always come up around sort of just how has this changed your thoughts on recruitment, right? I know sort of recruitment's always this big, right? Where do you find the bodies? Where do you go? I'm just sort of interested, and you sort of mentioned, I mean, you're starting that process, right? How do you feel like that sort of has changed? What's that look different sort of in the past? And sort of how do you think this sort of on the job structure sort of helps or sort of makes things different?
I think it's hopefully creating a pipeline for us. Like I said a little bit earlier, having some of these paras that are deeply rooted within our community and are connected, they understand our population, they understand the needs of our students, they understand the resources that are out there. So I think being able to tap into people that have already been committed and are committed to the school district, hopefully will continue to be a predictor of success for us to be able to have those people fill those positions. We're a very transient school district with our population and sometimes with our staff because our connection to New York City, how far we are, there's, you don't really think of that at Pocono Mountain School District because of where we're located. But we're hoping that people that have been rooted in the community and now have this opportunity are going to choose to stay with this opportunity. So we're hoping to be able to fill that gap that we can't fill right now by the traditional ways of, looking for positions that we've done in the past.
So I think candidates are also entering, with realistic expectations because they're already doing the role in the classrooms.
No one's surprised after graduation, that's for sure.
Right, exactly. So, the new teachers are starting with stronger relationships, I guess, and the practical skills that they already have and the confidence because they've been working with those kids. And that also reduces the early career attrition. Again, you're not getting surprised, like you said, we're not jumping in and be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize special ed was this challenging. So the folks who are going through the program already have that idea of what the expectations are.
Yeah, spot on. These candidates that we're investing in, they are already working with our special education population. So they are committed, to working with students that have needs. And it allows us really, besides, the general recruiting, we're recruiting, our paraprofessionals, our support staff, we're subs, community members, all of those individuals that may have some interest in that. They do have a strong knowledge of our community, the culture of our schools, which is huge. You're not trying to get someone from outside to bring them in where there's that learning curve. And it allows us to be really just more intentional about investing in ourselves and creating this pipeline to fill. My first two cohorts that I started 4 years ago, those individuals have already graduated and are already teaching, 2 and 3 years into being a special education teacher for our district.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We've seen districts that have had 70, 80 vacancies. And after 3-4 years, especially, when you get through that first cohort, you get a couple folks who just sort of sign up because it feels a little crazy that you can get on the job degree.
Yes.
And what we have found is I think that testimonial data coming from our paras and our long-term subs or the program saying, look, this is right. I've been on food stamps, right? But now I can go to school with my kids, right? I can teach, I can have an impact in my community, and right, I've got benefits and I've got sort of just a life-changing set of economics. I think that message has really resonated in the community. And now we have districts who've gone from 70, 80 vacancies to 100-person wait list in the process. And so we really know that sort of demand is there. It's really just a question of how do you sort of tap into it and how do you sort of make that part of the overall messaging in the process. There's a question here about sort of the university involvement. So we Bloomboard, right, we always partner with universities. So all of our candidates graduate from fully accredited EPP approved degrees. Can you talk about a little bit sort of your, sort of engagement with the universities and that side of the world, given that sort of obviously faculty are the ones leading the courses and the like, and sort of Bloomboard's helping with that sort of intermediary, sort of the glue in between. But can you just talk about sort of that relationship with the university and sort of how that's played out?
Well, our relationship is with Point Park University. And once again, I would say just because of the personnel that we've been dealing with, Dr. Wade and I, they've been wonderful. I mean, we constantly have that communication. Weekly meetings are set up. I believe they're always on Wednesdays. And Mark, I said, is normally there with some of the team members if I can't make that. So they're very supportive. Everything just seems to really be in sync. It's not like the ball is dropped. They continue to make sure that everything is good at the district level. They're watching the progress of our candidates, and they're always there for additional questions or anything that we have. So our relationship with Point Park and certainly the platform of Bloom Board has been excellent for our school district.
Absolutely. We get to see the actual progress of our students, of the paras as well. So we know there's 4 assignments and they've only done 2. And, the assignment is due this Friday and today's Wednesday. I would reach out to the paras and say, hey, everything's good. Do you need some extra support? And, because that's important, because when they're out on their own at the other universities and we don't really have that communication and that contact, I can't be that support. And I want to do that. And Dr. Robinson wants to do that for our paras. We want to make sure they have all the tools that they need to be successful through the program and to become viable candidates for our special education population.
Here in Alton, our students, our faculty, they're working with Lake Erie College. And so I don't actually have direct contact with Lake Erie, but what I do through Bloom Board is I have those biweekly meetings. I get those emails every week from India that's telling me the progress that my candidates are making. I'm able to touch in with the candidates each week. Matter of fact, I sent some emails today, just kind of following up to see where they are, if they need support, how many units they've completed. So I'm touching base with our candidates every week, whether it's, hey, congratulations, you've got this many units completed, good job, keep up the good work, or, hey, I noticed you haven't submitted anything this week. Do you need some additional support? Do you want me to tie you in with somebody in your cohort? How are you and your mentor doing? So I'm able to have those conversations, which have been really helpful and meaningful.
Can you talk a little, I know obviously in our 2-week meetings, just so folks have context, we track all the data. So we know every assignment, every rights requirement, every credit hour, and we have every 2 weeks, we go through every single learner, every single candidate and sort of exactly where they are. And obviously a lot of our work has a little bit of sort of escalation path of saying, okay, MTSS style, right? How do you know when we need to escalate something and when does somebody start to feel like they might be getting behind? And how do we sort of make sure that we can reach out to mentors and principals in that process? There's a question here around sort of cross-school and sort of cross-district cohorts in the process. I'm just sort of interested in how you all have been thinking about sort of that cohort model. We know that that's super important in the process. We know that obviously folks, ideally we've got multiple candidates in the same school. So they've got somebody there. We sort of really try to make that more deliberate. But can you talk a little bit about that sort of cross-district, sort of cross-school cohorts as you all have been trying to sort of think through them and navigate them?
Well,
Go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead, Doc.
No, you go ahead, Mark. I don't want to.
Okay. So we paired up our paras to at least make sure that more than one is in the same building, so they can bounce ideas off each other. And I have 4 supervisors of special education who are spread out across the district. So they're also included on these meetings. So when, there's an issue, I always reach out to those guys and say, hey, can you touch base with the mentors? Can you make sure you meet with the paras to see, if they need any additional supports? And even we will get together and make sure that they have enough time to kind of cross talk with schools. Most of our paras in the program are on the elementary schedule. And we have a few that are on the secondary schedule. So make sure that they have the time to be able to talk and meet with the mentors and the supervisors.
If I can just add to that, I think this is me, maybe it's the old fashioned superintendent in me or the fact that I've been at Pocono Mountain for 37 years, but I like that personal touch. So Mark and I also, made time to meet with all of them in December, like right before the end of, they only had a few more things to do. Kind of encourage them, sit around the table with 8 of them. And I think it means a lot too to the program when they see that, Dr. Wade's there with them, I'm there with them. This is important. It's not just, it's been, put out there and we're kind of leaving you on your own. We made sure it was a deliberate, intentional meeting with them to check on them, see how they're doing. And actually, we were actually trying to brand, we were getting their feedback on branding what we wanted that program to look like. What are we going to call it for Pocono Mountain? Let them have some input on that, about getting t-shirts and things done. This will be our first cohort going through. So I think having those intentional, conversations with the people going through that from people who are in our positions are very, it's just very important for the whole program to be successful as well.
And I would say here, I don't necessarily do like the big formal meetings with our cohorts, but when I am in the buildings, I do stop in and I check on those individuals, just so they know that I know how their progress is going and offering that support if they're struggling. I know one candidate was struggling because she's in an early childhood classroom and she's the only person that's in that type of setting. So we talked through ways for her to get to some other buildings so she can actually see some of the content classes that she's not able to see at the early childhood center.
There's a question here on sort of the agency, use of agencies, use of sort of sub-services. I don't know if that's sort of helpful or context. Do either of y'all use sub-services, and sort of how does that relate to sort of the work that y'all are doing?
Yeah, we don't use a sub-service here in Alton.
We do not either.
I can say from our other districts, right, we do know that there's a bunch of sort of clients that do, and typically what we find is there's sort of an interesting path to sort of using a stepstone, like a stepping stone model, where you say, okay, once you satisfy your contract in an agency, or could you provide an on-ramp into like an associate teacher pathway? That's a new job description. That's a cheaper role than a fully licensed teacher, but allows you to have somebody who's sort of working on an intern certification or other sort of pathway while they're working on that degree. And so we have lots of different pathways where we've seen sort of folks integrate it into that sub-model in the process. I know there's another question in here on licensure that I'm happy to sort of field. So we, Bloom Boards, we spend lots of time making sure that everything maps to state certification requirements and all the testing in the process. And we actually start embedding sort of some of the predictive testing into the coursework as early as the second semester in the process. And so we really are deliberate about making sure that we know where every candidate is in the process. Our certification rates are, in most cases, 95%. Our completion retention rates are 90+%. So we do know, once your degree and your job become the same experience, you're very likely to be successful because there's just such a massive economic and sort of, mobility sort of incentive there in the process. I know we're getting tight on time here, so certainly please feel free to continue to add questions into the chat. There's a question on sort of the financial processes, sort of board approvals in the process. So we'd love to spend a little bit of time on sort of how you all have been sort of going through this from the fiscal side of it and sort of the cost to the district, and obviously how we sort of braid some of that funding in the process.
For Pocono Mountain, I really had started to talk about this program 2 years ago before we started it with our school board members. Now, we had some turnover in school board members, but for the most part, I had the consistent board members that I had started the conversation with. And I think we talked, certainly it's an investment for the district to put forth with this program, but there's also an investment in money that's being paid when you're constantly training people and you don't have that, and you need to have that recruitment. There's money for recruitment efforts. So you really have to be able, I think, as a superintendent, to be able to explain those things to the board. And really kind of lay that out in what they want that future to look like. Where's that money going to be spent? Continuing to, develop people, and then potentially they move on, where if you can really work with people that are rooted within your community and be able to keep them there, I think there's a lot to say for a financial gain for the district as well. I'll let Mark talk about this part, but we were also very fortunate within our district to have the opportunity to apply for the workforce development grant. So I'll let Mark take that part because he took the lead on that, and that was very helpful for our school district as well.
So in coordination with Bloom Board, of course, we filled out the application grant through the Monroe County Workforce Development Board, and we were able to acquire $3,000 per candidate each year for the Workforce Development Grant. We'll probably have to, I'm sure we're going to reapply next year. But, that also, help with, subsidizing some of those out-of-pocket expenses for the paras. I mean, we could have used that for the district, but I think it was more pertinent for us and to help our paras subsidize some of those out-of-pocket costs.
And I'll say here in Alton, we did apply for that grant and unfortunately weren't able to get it this year, but that doesn't mean we won't try again next year. But our paras, we really used our teacher vacancy grant money so that our paras were not coming out of pocket. They applied, of course, for their FAFSA, but we covered all of their additional expenses, fees, and all of that stuff. And we've done that for all these cohorts. We're going to have to be a little more creative now that those funds are gone for this next school year. So certainly looking at the Workforce Development Grant and other ways, and that will require some additional conversations with the board to see, what the district can add on top of that to invest in our teachers. Because I do see that with this being our fourth year of doing it, I know that the impact is there, and we have some data to show them of people, the candidates that we've hired that were pairs. And I think that conversation will go a little more smoothly.
Yeah, I would say, we've been doing a lot of work on the workforce front. So I would say, one, if you're new to this conversation, my number one suggestion, if you have not reached out to or connected with your workforce board, that's sort of step one, right? You should build that relationship, right? There is a lot of funding coming from the workforce development, from the Department of Labor side to help fund and subsidize the programs. We're seeing, our real goal from the district level is if we can, with, between the combination of Pell funding, state aid, and with some workforce funding, if we can get the cost per candidate per year down to less than $5,000, that's a really big unlock. And it really sort of helps in terms of sustainability and long-term, right, sort of timelines to really sort of make the program work. We have, right, in Illinois, we got our first workforce board to fully fund the program. So the district actually paid $0 for their entire cohort in the process because workforce board funds were able to sort of cover that. And I think the feedback we hear over and over again from our workforce boards is, we didn't even know or think about the district as an employer. And it turns out in most of our counties, the districts are the largest employer. And so the idea that you can actually start to marry, right, the incentives that the Department of Labor have around creating pathways into sort of long-term employment in high-need vacancy areas, right, and sort of using their funding really well for the largest employer in the county, that's a really great fit. And we find that it's really helpful just in terms of, what that means for both sort of subsidizing the costs and driving the cost down. And ultimately, most of our candidates pay $0 out of pocket for the program. And so it really is a life-changing sort of, experience because we're able to sort of get a fully funded degree inside of the job, right, using these sort of sources of funding. I know we're running close on time, so I want to sort of give everybody just a little bit of chance to sort of, things that you would wish for, right, knowing going in, right, or advice you would give to a district who's sitting on the call right now, thinking about, I don't have any of this sort of built. This seems, seems big, seems like a lot, right? Sort of what advice would you give sort of districts as they're thinking about it? And then we'll sort of come back for another round of sort of closing comments or other thoughts. And please, again, put any final comments or questions into the chat and we'll make sure we can get to them.
I would say my piece of advice would be to start small. I think that is really important to do it well so that you can really kind of map out the timelines and knowing that it's really a multi-year kind of strategy that you're approaching this with. It's not going to fix overnight, the problems that you have with the teacher shortage. And then really think about what are your high needs areas. And for us, that was special education was our biggest one, and it was a good fit. But, we also struggle getting qualified math and science teachers currently, and unfortunately, I've had to use a lot of international teachers to kind of fill some of those vacancy issues. So that is like, you know, when we advertised this, we had also advertised looking for candidates that were looking for an endorsement in another area, in another content area, because we were willing to pay for that as well. So really kind of focus on what your high needs are, kind of start small, be intentional with the timelines, the time that it's going to take, and so that you can really frame this to your counterparts as really an investment in retention, being a little proactive instead of reactive to the teacher shortage.
And I think being transparent about the opportunity and the challenges, including the workload, the funding and support structures is important. It's also important to engage our unions and the community partners as early as possible. And also, I think we kind of need to clarify how the supervision and accountability will be maintained throughout the pathway, so they know that they're being supported throughout the process.
In addition to both of those things, though, I do think it starting small, which I agree with Wendy, is huge, because I think that's what we did to help make it successful, that we did only start with 8 paras, but I would start the conversations early. I think that really helped me as a superintendent be able to talk to the school board, being able to say, this is what we're thinking, this is why we're thinking it, expose them to, other programs that have been successful doing this. And I think that really gets them engaged versus just trying to sell them something overnight, because I think school boards, sometimes they need to understand all of the pieces with that, and it's not just a one-shop sale. School boards usually don't like that. So I think being able to show, hey, this school district, did it for this, with this amount of students, here was the success this school district did. And I think that really helps when you're, trying to build that, kind of commitment from your school board to move forward.
Yeah, we've certainly seen quite a bit of that sort of, it is a long-term game, right? But we're not going to rebuild the teacher pipeline overnight. I think we found a couple of key, we have launched some new, especially some para recruitment tools using, frankly, just the testimonial data we have, right? Our testimonials are as good as they get in the process. And so sharing sort of stories of folks from within the community to the community and having them talk about how successful it's been and why it's been a life-changing experience. We know that there's just a lot of pent-up interest in sort of, having a better impact and sort of getting into something that feels more long-term and stable in the process. And so we know that there are a lot more sort of near-term recruitment tools that we're rolling out and launching to help with that. And then I do think one of the other sort of pathways we've seen is like, how do you start to dip into just high school students in the process and recent high school grads? And this is, if I would say there's probably any larger sort of more, macro trend that really is sort of coming to fruition here, I think we're finding that high school kids are pretty disenfranchised with where college, right, prospects are, especially in the AI world, right, especially in the, right, sort of the debt world that we're living in. And so the idea that, right, the school district can come and say, hey, if you want to come be a para, right, in an elementary school, don't put high school kids and recent high school grads in high schools. But if you want to be a para in an elementary school, right, and actually sort of start working on a 3-year bachelor's degree, right, or a 4-year bachelor's degree while you're working, right out of college, while you're living at home, and you're working full time and you're working on your degree and you can graduate before all your friends while you're making money, that's a pretty interesting prospect that we're just seeing a lot of, right, sort of high school kids really start to gravitate towards. And so I do think there are a lot of potentials in terms of how this sort of where this world goes in terms of the prospects, in terms of how to sort of use these types of programs to just reconstitute the pipeline. Annie, I know we're sort of a little wrapping up on time. We're a couple minutes over here. Any final parting words or any sort of thoughts in terms of where you think this work goes in the future for y'all that would be helpful?
Well, I think for the future, we're hoping to, I think Mark already kind of mentioned, we're already thinking about summer and our next fall cohort. So hopefully we're going to continue with this process to grow our own. And, hopefully a couple of years down the road, we'll see the actual, benefit of having, the paras being able to stay within our community. So I think for us, it's just really the excitement of moving forward. You did mention, though, the high school piece. It's interesting because we have talked about that. because we have a lot of those programs within our school district. We're lucky we actually have teachers who work within daycares within our school district. So this is a conversation that Dr. Wade and I have had in tapping in to those students and being able to have a much more cost-effective way for students to be able to get their degree with the cost of education for a lot of our students now. So that's probably the next area that we would like to look at.
We do have a future educators program that we currently take students from both of our high schools, and we take them with the local IU and, expose them to all of the opportunities that special ed provides. It's not just being a special education teacher. We show them, OT, visually impaired, and all those other aspects of the special education world. So audiology aspects of it. So they are very interested, and we have a great group of kids right now. We have about 30 something kids across the district who are committed to going into college, into doing special education.
Love it.
Yeah. And I would say here too is continuing to work with our students at the high school level that are in the future ed program as well, getting them to really commit to the field of education. I know our local community college, Lewis and Clark Community College, created a paraprofessional course where it's helping individuals, pass those tests so that they can get that certification. And so we've been letting those individuals do their shadowing, getting their observation hours in our school so that hopefully we can get them one as for employees and they can go through this program as well. But ultimately, I think my goal for this Grow Your Own program is to really be intentional about creating career pathways for our dedicated employees so that our students that have disabilities really have a consistent and qualified educator in their classrooms. And that's what's ultimately the most important for me.
Well, I really appreciate the time. This has been a pretty super helpful, engaging conversation around sort of the work that's happening. I know it's, again, a pretty tumultuous time in the education world more broadly. And so certainly appreciate all of y'all's leadership in the process and trying to help navigate the work here. So thank you so much for the time. And certainly if you have questions or anything else, obviously you can reach out to the Bloom Board team, reach out to any of our folks here. It'd be helpful.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. Thank you for joining us for Solving the Special Education Teacher Shortage, a sustainable approach to growing your own educators.